Welcome to this week's episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. On this week's episode, we talk about how American university students are occupying Gaza. Let's get started. I think it is safe to say that by now, all of my listeners have probably heard about these encampments happening all across America on university campuses. For any of my listeners who maybe aren't keeping up with the news due to the overwhelming nature of all of the anti-Semitism we're seeing, recently we've seen a new tactic being done by the supposed pro-Palestinian, but I call anti-Israel groups, and we'll talk about why I call them that in a minute. Rather than the old-fashioned, one-time, here-there anti-Semitism that we've been seeing for pretty much months at this point, we are now seeing an official, coordinated, targeted anti-Semitism, specifically targeted at university campuses. We see these things called encampments across the United States at Ivy League universities and even non-Ivy League universities. What these people are doing, essentially, is they've set up tents and fenced off illegally areas of university campuses and have called them encampments and refused to allow certain people in. They have now decided to squat, essentially, there and not leave until supposedly their demands are met. Although we'll talk about that in a moment too. So essentially what we have here is a massive movement, very coordinated across the United States, taking over and, pardon my pun, occupying land that doesn't belong to them and making it inaccessible to anybody else who's paying tuition to be at that school. All, so they say, in the name of Palestinian rights and Gaza and all of those fake talking points that they talk about. Don't ask me exactly how this encampment, or even multiple of these encampments, somehow have helped anything in Gaza. Typically, we hear the story that it's raising awareness. We have constant news coverage about these encampments, and it clearly is getting out to the world all of the problems in Gaza. However, I would point out the fact that even though we're hearing endlessly about these issues in Gaza and the encampments especially, the reality is that most of the people at this encampment, when approached with cameras and news reporters and people in general, have 0 point to make about Gaza. Most of them refuse to speak. That's in addition to the fact that if you watch any of the footage, almost every single person in that encampment uses a keffiyeh or a COVID mask. Ironically, COVID masks are now very in style these days because they hide the identity of those who clearly are too embarrassed to show their face. I don't know if they're afraid their parents will find out they're wasting their tuition money. I don't know if they're embarrassed they'll never get a job when it comes out on the internet that they are rabid anti-Semites. But clearly it is a vital part of their encampment to block their identities and not answer any questions. This is likely because many who have spoken on camera look like complete idiots when they don't know what they're talking about or making up lies, and it makes the entire movement look like it has no idea what it's talking about. So to save embarrassment, it seems like they've told everybody to stop talking. So how that situation really saves Gazans or Palestinians is beyond me. Yes, they're bringing awareness by bothering people, by being anti-Semitic, which we'll talk about in a minute, but it's not really helping Gaza. I haven't really checked the news today, but I'm pretty sure nothing's changed in Gaza. Interestingly, it's funny that they're using university campuses. They're not squatting in Central Park in New York or squatting anywhere else. So why universities? First thing I would say is probably because they are very gullible and susceptible people. We know from history the university students tend to be very radicalized easily. They're young, and I hate to call them uneducated. Ironically, you're at school and you're not educated. But this is why it's a very easy target. And we know that there are a lot of people funding, like Qatar, Russia, all the Arab states are throwing money into the university system to essentially change policy. We've talked about this on the podcast before. Are those bribes from these countries the reason why these presidents are a little hesitant to take action against these encampments? I don't know. But even more interesting, when you look at history, kind of like the time we're in now where I've compared to essentially the 1930s in Germany, the amount of anti-Semitism we're seeing, we also saw universities were the first place that the Nazis tried to remove Jewish people from campus. The University of Vienna, there's a photo you could find online showing Nazis linked arm in arm, refusing to allow Jews to enter the university. Kind of sounds like what's going on today in America. What's that phrase we often use? Those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. Clearly, the whitewashing of history, especially around the Holocaust, has allowed us to essentially repeat 1930s all over again. So much so that rather than dealing with the problem on campus, that is the encampments illegally holding places and not allowing and harassing Jews on their campuses, rather than deal with that, a lot of these schools have done things like cancel classes for the year, go online instead to allow the Jews who are too afraid to come to campus to still go to class. These are band-aid solutions, if even that. Deal with the problem, which is those radical people who are threatening and attacking Jews on campus. Don't just tell the Jews to stop coming. When I mention the fact that people are being harassed or attacked, there are plenty of videos you can go see online. People are posting them left, right, and center. It's unreal, the stuff we're seeing. This is not anti-Israel. This is not pro-Palestinian. This is anti-Semitism with no question. If you see the signs that people are holding saying Zionists not allowed, which by the way is just code for Jews, and we know this because how many times do you see these people harassing Christian evangelicals who are very pro-Israel and very strong Zionists, but you don't see them being banned from campus? This is about Jews. The way that whenever a Jewish person enters their quote-unquote encampment, the entire group surrounds these people and essentially blocks them from moving on their own campus, harassing them to the point of tears in some cases or threats in others. We've seen people who are bravely walking into the encampments to ask questions, and they are essentially harassed or attacked. We've seen people hit in the eye with a flagpole. We've seen people smashed over the head with objects. Anybody who goes into that encampment that clearly has signs that say no Jews allowed and no one who supports Israel allowed, they are attacked viciously by these masked cowards. This is like every high school bully's dream, to have the freedom to bully anybody you want and have zero consequences. This is not pro-Palestinian by any standards. I have not heard one chant other than, quote, free Palestine, which to be honest, we all know what that really means. But we've not heard one chant pro-Palestinian. We've not heard about the Palestinian people. We've not heard anything about Hamas and what they're doing. We've not even heard about releasing the hostages, which would cause a ceasefire, at least temporarily. Not a single thing they say is ever pro-Palestinian or pro-Gaza. Everything they say is anti-Semitic, not even anti-Israel. It is truly amazing how the veneer of political correctness when this whole thing started was, no, we don't hate Jews, we just want to have a free Palestine, has slowly faded, and now they are allowing themselves to say the truth. They essentially want Jews off campus, including some of the leaders of these movements. One recently from Colombia came out and said that we should be grateful that he is not going out and murdering Zionists yet. This is what they're saying. They are actively saying that they would like to, if they were allowed, to murder Zionists, which again is code for Jews. Imagine any other situation where this would be allowed. Luckily, this gentleman apparently was suspended or expelled from school, but do you really think that he's the only one who believes this, who's been brainwashed to think this way? Recently, Professor Scott Galloway was on a late-night show and said a very interesting thing. And I want to repeat it here, but I want to give him the credit. He said, imagine after one of the church shootings in the United States where multiple African Americans were killed, that someone would show up at Columbia wearing a white hood like the KKK, holding a Confederate flag, calling for that attack to be repeated over and over again. There is no way that that would ever fly on a university campus. That is not free speech. And yet, meanwhile, these groups of Palestinian supporters, aka anti-Semites, are calling daily for intifada. For those of you who may be less familiar with intifada, it literally means armed resistance. Despite what they will tell you, they'll water it down. No, it just means resistance in some way. The intifada, the second intifada especially, was an incredibly violent suicide bombing, stabbings, shooting, everything you can imagine in the streets of Israel. It meant dead Israelis and dead Jews. So when they say intifada, that's what it means, despite what they pretend it means. Frankly, many people in these encampments probably don't even know what it means. They're just brainwashed to talk about intifada and have no idea what it actually means. But imagine any other group being told you are not allowed on campus. If you come on campus, you'd be lucky that we don't kill you. And it just is no big deal. It's free speech, right? I'm pretty sure the university would not allow KKK members and students who agree with KKK members to encamp and call for the death and harassment of black people in America. It wouldn't happen. But we pretend like, no, but this is kind of like a gray zone with the whole Palestinian-Israeli conflict. We don't know what's going on here. This is kind of confusing. We can't make a decision. This is absolutely ridiculous that they pretend they don't know what's going on. Look at the signs they're holding. It is pretty clear. Some of you might be asking what many people have been asking, which is, how are these people affording to A, not go to class and not actually have a job because they're just squatting on a campus? And number two, how do they feed themselves? If you see videos, there's buffets these people are eating from, and there are tents set up, all beautifully coordinated. Someone sent in 50, 60 tents for everyone to sleep in. Where's the money coming from? And the reality is, this is not a new phenomenon. There have been many organizations like Jewish Voices for Peace, which is a very ironic name if you know how they feel, and Students for Justice in Palestine. These groups are being funded by overseas terrorist organizations like Hamas and Iran. They are funded by billionaires, and all they do is they hold this money waiting for this moment. This is like their Super Bowl, waiting for a time that they can just throw every dollar they have because they think they're somehow winning. They're getting all of this fame and notoriety. They've got every college student joining in, even if they have no idea what they're talking about. This is amazing for them. They are throwing every dime they get into this new encampment plan. And what are they achieving? I'm just genuinely curious. So far, they've gotten essentially nothing done for Gazans. Imagine what you can do with those billions of dollars spent on encampments and feeding all these privileged students in universities if you actually sent that to Gaza right now. Funny how no one is asking who's paying for these and why that money isn't going to the actual people who they claim are suffering. Supposedly, when you talk to them, and people have, they have zero idea of what they're talking about. There are very funny videos of people being asked why you're here, what you're doing, and they literally have no idea. No clue what they're doing there. The people who are in charge have apparently come up with these demands from the university. They are demanding a whole bunch of different things, including that the universities divest from Israel. Therefore, no longer support or have campuses in Israel, fund technology or science in Israel or by Israelis. They want full divestment from Israel. This is honestly a complete dream that they have. Schools will take their money and use it however they want. The fact that Israel literally is the hub of the Middle East for technology, medicine, education, it is a very highly educated and very high technology country. And so, of course, these institutions get involved in Israel with research and development and all these amazing companies that are coming out. They are absolutely not going to divest. So essentially, this encampment BS they're doing is all for nothing. And obviously, we can point out the fact that they want to divest from Israel because they claim Israel is bad, yet we don't hear them divesting from literally any other country. It's that whole antisemitism thing coming up again. You know, you can pretend for a while, but it's clearly antisemitism. So we see that literally nothing is being done to support the people of Gaza. And what's really interesting is a recent article published in Newsweek by Hamza Hawidi. This is a man who used to live in Gaza City, currently living in Europe, who wrote an opinion piece which is really shocking the entire world. This is from the words of a man who lived in Gaza himself, and he came out with an article called Message from a Gazan to Campus Protesters: You're Hurting the Palestinian Cause. I have talked endlessly about how things like boycott, divest, and sanctions, anything that goes on in the West, essentially ends up hurting the Palestinian people. And this gentleman here is confirming that. He has said that these protests are essentially hijacking the Palestinian cause. It is a bunch of privileged and uneducated people who are simply using the Gazan cause to attack Jews and to live out their worst terrorist fantasies. He has called these protesters out clearly for their anti-Semitism. He admits this doesn't help. Jews have a right to be safe on campuses. This is not supporting Gaza at all to be anti-Semitic to American Jews. It literally serves no purpose for Gaza. And you're just doing it because all you want to do is hurt Jews. And essentially, because you're hurting Jews and doing these encampments, no one's actually talking about the real issues in Gaza, like Hamas, for example. He openly says people in Gaza want Hamas gone. And how dare you, Americans, say, no, we love Hamas. We want to wear Hamas flags and put on headbands and support them. We love Hamas. They are the greatest freedom fighters ever to happen in the entire world. And he, someone who lived in Gaza, someone who lived under Hamas, says, stop telling us what we should have. You don't know anything about what's going on. And here you are telling us that we should stay with Hamas, that Hamas are freedom fighters. People of Gaza are terrified of Hamas and don't want them there anymore. He even goes as far to say that using the Intifada against Jews in North America is a disgusting practice. Because not only were Jews hurt in the Intifada, Palestinians were hurt in the Intifada. In one of my old podcasts, if you go back and listen, I talk about the Intrafada, which is during the Intifada, while they're killing Jews, they were also cleaning house, they called it. And they murdered hundreds of their own people who were supposedly going to go against the Palestinian leadership or people who were collaborating. They murdered people without any trial or any kind of cause, and many actually turned out to be innocent. But they said, you know what, a couple percentage of people dying for no reason, that's fine with us. That's a job well done for us. So for people in America to call for Intifada, not knowing what it was or what it is, and supporting the killing of Jews and Palestinians is unbelievable. In the article, he says, and I quote, "But it is not just the anti-Semitism that has me despairing. It is the hypocrisy. Where were you caring about the young people when Hamas took over Gaza and slaughtered hundreds of Gazans, when Hamas held 2 million Gazans captive for more than 17 years? Why didn't you speak about the fact that Hamas led Gazans into this conflict, which resulted in many deaths and many injured, according to Gazan municipal authorities? Where were you when Hamas fires missiles, claiming the lives of hundreds of Gazans, or when Hamas murdered young people in order to steal aid and resell it to those same Gazans at massively inflated prices? The only conclusion that can be drawn from these demonstrators' silence about concerning Hamas's atrocities and their anti-Semitic chants is that they are not concerned with protecting Palestinians. They are out in their tents because of hatred of Jews and Israelis." In the end, honestly, these encampments are just growing to a fever pitch. It is unbelievable the amount that people will allow anti-Semitism to thrive before they even start acting on it. We've seen finally colleges calling in the police to come and break up these illegal protests. We've seen how many people in these protests are not even students, who are just agitators who want to come and cosplay as terrorists. Even though these very privileged Ivy League students in America are protesting for Gaza by occupying land that doesn't belong to them, ironic. Clearly, what these protests are actually doing is being anti-Semitic and using the Gazans as an excuse for their anti-Semitism and their rage. So really, even if they're occupying the campus in America, really they're actually occupying Gaza by not allowing the issues that are facing Jews, Israelis, and Gazans in the region to actually be solved. Instead, we're letting them hijack the message and ensure nothing gets fixed in Gaza. They may as well just be protesting in tents in the middle of Gaza. This has been another episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. Don't forget to check us out on social media at jdr.podcast and check out some of our other episodes on your favorite podcast source. We'll see you next time.